All right, let's go ahead and get started for today. Welcome everyone to World Quant Office Hours. Last week 8 of Monday, first office hours for the week. Hope everyone is doing fine today. If for those who are with us, do let me know that you can hear me, so that I know that we can. That there's no change in on my end. I see Thomas here. Hello, Tom. Let me know if you can hear me. That'd be very appreciated. I'll put my agenda here. We'll talk about Python environments. And then we will talk about Flask. That's what I want to talk about today. All right, I see Naya is here, Emmanuel is here. Do let me know that you can hear me so I can know that I'm transmitting. All right, thank you, Amadara. Thank you, Naya, for letting me know that you can hear me. Appreciate that. It's always nice to know that you guys can hear me, so don't have any other technical difficulties. All right, welcome, guys, to Office Hours. Thank you, Tom, for the confirmation. My agenda today is, noticed we've gone through the mini projects, right? We started working on, we learned about creating a command line utility for analyzing those practices that might have an anomalous number of prescriptions for opioids. We learned about version control with Git. We practiced that, and I think we've set up a lot of good foundational material, a lot of good extra material we need to work on this project together, this web application. And then if you recall on Thursday, what we did is if we go ahead back here, go to data course. Let's see, where was it? I think I was in Office Hours. I had a notebook. Was it this one? No, it was not that one. Let's see, was it this one? Yeah, I think it was this one here. Yeah, played around with it. And we had a couple set of functions. A process that had a user, right? Here is a user. This user, we get their IP address. We get their location. So we have a process here that gets there. We send the IP address. We get location. Horrible handwriting today. We use his location to get weather. And we can display that temperature. And if I recall, all right, so do kernel restart and clear output, and let's see, let's try that out. Cell run all above. So we have our main function that does everything: get the IP address, get the location, get the weather, and here is our weather data. Now notice this JSON is a little bit complicated. All right, it's if we take a look at here, there's a lot of information to pull out. So maybe what we need to do next is figure out in this JSON, in the response that came back to us, where to get the current temperature. Let's look for that. It's a bit messy. So let me go ahead and call this weather data. And let me take a look at the keys. So type, geometry, and properties. Interesting. Nothing too elaborate, nothing too useful. But let's see if we can figure out where is our weather data. So let's look into properties. That might give us some clue. Properties. Properties. So here appears to be the weather information. Quite a lot of information. Meta data about the data, right? The units. The units of those measurements. We have something called time series, and this appears to be a time series data we can use. So maybe we can pull that out. So time series. So here is all our data. You can imagine what we could do is we probably could dump this into a pandas data frame. Right? We can probably dump this, right? Import pandas as PD. And we could do something like df equals PD data frame. Let's see what happens if I just dump this into a pandas data frame. Might be a little easier to work with. Ah, that worked out. So let me look at head. Ah, so I have time and I have data. So let me go ahead and select data. I'll just select one field, one of them. So here we have instant. I guess maybe instant might refer to what was the temperature right then and there. And we have air temperature. So that might be the air temperature might be what we want. Let's see, Subham is here. Hello, Subham. And we have information about what is the next 12 hours and so forth. All right, next 12 hours, 1 hour, and so forth. So it looks like from here, we can probably take instant, and that returns, and say details. And in there, air temperature. Air temperature. 11.3 degrees Celsius. So that's what's the current temperature right now in Virginia. Remember, recall that our pod is located in Virginia. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and if we look at our main function, I'm going to go ahead and print out coords. All right, just print out coords there. So this is our coordinates. And if I go to, let's say, weather.com, see Soon is here. Hello, Soon. And I type in, well, let me just type in those coordinates. Let's see where that is. All right, gave us down Virginia Beach. I think that's the city that our server is in. All right, it's in this city. Let's see, zoom out. Yeah, it's in the city of Virginia Beach. So let's see what the temperature is in Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach, just to make sure that we are getting the results we get match up. So right now it says it's 57 degrees in Virginia Beach. Of course, this is in Fahrenheit. So I can take 11.3 multiply by 9/5 plus 32. That's the rule to get to Fahrenheit. And it's 52 degrees. So what we get back from the service, it's 52 degrees Fahrenheit. What we get from weather.com website is 57. Right? It's gonna, of course, it's gonna be different. It's not gonna be exactly the same. But this is just a sanity check that, you know what, the information we're getting is probably correct. I think we have it set up correctly. Any questions people have? So what I can do next is I can just go ahead and let's see, df data. Right, if I look at df data and df, yeah, okay. So we could do is we can just go ahead and copy this, paste it right there. Paste it right there. Modify, and I can say response. I can call this data. And then I can say data 0 instant detail air temperature. So quite a lot of things we have to write out, but it's a bit of a messy data set. If we modify this here, and now if I run this here and I call get weather data, I get a key error. I think maybe let's try that. I think I may have messed up. What is it? Properties, time series. There you go. It's a bit messy. So let's try that out. Properties, time series 0. Know what instant is. Now, let's go ahead and just return data. Let's go back and figure that out. So we have weather data, and we say properties and time series. There is our time series, and then we can go ahead and say that is a list, so we can index 0, and then we can say after we index 0, we can pull out and say details and air temperature. It doesn't know what details is. All right, let's take a look at that again. So there's a key. There's a key called data. And then there is details. Instant, details, and air temperature. There we go. Very complicated, very nested dictionary, very nested JSON that came out. But if we look at it, we can pull out the air temperature. I'll go ahead and copy that, and then I will go ahead and paste it right there. And I think we called it data. And let's go ahead and run this there, run it there. And now we get printout. This is called temperature. Let me just print out temperature. And there we go, 11.3 degrees Celsius. All right, let me know if there are any questions, but basically what we did is we had to look at the response, the weather data. It's a lot of information there. A lot of information perhaps we can use to construct a plot of the temperature throughout time. Maybe that's something we can add into our project after we have something to show. But do let me know if there are any questions. Let me see the chat here. What's going on? Based on IP address, can we determine whether to return Fahrenheit or Celsius? So Andre brings up a good question, and they are saying, hey, we know their location, and we understand that a majority of the countries use Celsius, but maybe we should have some code, some logic that figures out what country they're in, looks up perhaps in some information about whether that country uses Fahrenheit or Celsius, and then use that to modify what is returned as a response. And we could do that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and keep that in mind, because when we go through and we build this application, maybe that feature won't be included. However, if we were to host this project publicly, then maybe you can take that project and introduce a change that adds that feature. So there are a couple of things. What I want to do with this project is let's make a note of some improvements, but I will let you take care of those sets of improvements. We're going to work together on the base project. I'm going to host this project on my personal GitHub, but I'm going to allow people to go ahead and introduce changes into the project base, into the code base. And that's what I want to do. So Andre, when we finally host this, feel free to open up a pull request, and we'll talk about the procedure for that and introduce that change. Okay. So now I can call this, it's no longer really weather data, it's temperature. Temperature. And then I can go ahead and say, print out a greeting. I can print out a greeting that says, hello, the temperature is temperature degrees Celsius. Something like that. No longer need to return. Save that there, run that there, and let's try that out. And, oh, it's an F string. Forgot to put the F in front. It's an F string. And there we go. Hello. The temperature is 11.3 degrees Celsius. Okay. So, all right. Any questions people have? I think we've made up a good stopping point for this here. But what we want to talk about next is Python environments, and then transition to talk about Flask, which is a Python web framework. So we're going to play around with Flask. And we'll first talk about Python environments, and then we'll talk about Flask and learn enough Flask, and then bring Flask and this code together for our web application. How do I see the recordings of office hours from last week? Keep in mind that we have a playlist of past office hours. So if you go into your pod, you go into video links, At the very bottom is the office hour playlist, so take a look at that. And here are all the office hours. And I even put a little thumbnail so you know what the topic is going to be for that office hours. Helps you navigate for the topic of interest. So keep that in mind. In fact, I will paste that link here in the chat. Let me know if there are other questions people have before we talk about Python environments and before we start talking about Flask. So if I were to sketch out the rest of the topics for this week, Python, Flask, local deployment, and then finally remote deployment. In other words, make it work on our personal computer and then deploy it to a wider audience on the World Wide Web, and then GitHub. The office hours, there is no guarantee, right? I see someone asking about are the office hours remain on YouTube? There's no guarantee that the office hour videos will be there in perpetuity. They'll be there at least for the end of this calendar year, but we don't make any guarantees whether those videos will be available beyond this cohort's beyond the end of this cohort. Not saying that we'll remove them, just saying that we're not going to make any guarantees whether they'll be continually be available. Okay, let me know if there are other questions people have before we talk about Python environments. I see Bismarck is here. Hello, Bismarck. All right, I'm going to try to import Flask. Let's import the Python package Flask for us to use. And I get an error message. I get an error message saying module not found error. No module named Flask. So what's happening here is that there is no Python package currently installed in our environment called Flask. I try to import it, and I get a module not found error. All right, so we can go ahead and install Flask into our environment. But before we do that, let's think about the ramifications if we were to install Flask in our Python environment. So you can think of our computer, whether our server, whatever, has Python installed. And this Python environment is system-wide, a system-wide Python environment. And there are programs that are going to make use of our Python environment we have system-wide and Python packages to make things work. However, if I start modifying this system-wide Python environment, perhaps installing packages, upgrading packages, removing packages, then what would happen is I might run the risk of messing up the system-wide Python environment. There might be some program or some application that our computer uses for a specific version of a package. If that version of the package changes because we are installing new packages and we're upgrading, then maybe that application will no longer work. So we have our system-wide Python. It's configured to work with certain versions. We have applications on our computer that are perhaps using this Python environment. If we start messing around with this environment, installing, upgrading, changing things, we run the risk of breaking those applications. Maybe nothing were to happen. Maybe it's perfectly fine. But who knows? We might tamper with something. We might break something down. In fact, for your pods, the same thing might happen. You might install additional packages to your Python environment that we provide, but that might mess up your Python environment in your pod. so that maybe the notebooks won't run. In fact, sometimes I see people who have installed things on their pod, they mess up their notebooks, so they mess up their Python environment, and they say, hey, the notebooks don't run, or I can't open this notebook, or I get this error. It's because they started messing around with the Python environment. And they installed some package that upgraded this package to another version, and that version isn't compatible with our environment, and things break down. So there's got to be a better way. And there is a better way. And that better way is through this idea of called virtual environments. So in other words, what we can do is that we have this system-wide Python. However, we can go ahead and create an isolated Python environment. An isolated Python environment right here. That's my little symbol for Python. Install packages that only exist in this isolated Python environment. And that's my little picture of a box. I guess a package. And then we can tell our application, don't use the system-wide Python environment. Use this specific isolated Python environment. Because this isolated Python environment, I can control which packages I install. I can make sure it works for my application. And I don't have to worry about making sure that these packages that I'm installing work system-wide. Create an isolated environment that I can control and that I will run my application in. And now I don't have to worry about making changes that might break my system-wide Python environment. So when you work on projects, this is the procedure to go about. It is best practice not to use your system-wide Python, not to mess around with that, but to create a virtual environment where we control what packages are there, the version of those packages, and run our application in that environment. Let me know if there are any questions about this overview before we start creating a Python virtual environment. Okay, let's go ahead and create that virtual Python environment. I see Michael is here. Hello, Michael. All right, so let's go into Data Course, and I'm going to open up, create a new directory, new folder. I'm going to call this folder, I'm going to call this WorldQuant Project. So we're going to put all our project files. There it is. I'm going to open up a, let's see, I'm going to say terminal. Let's open up a terminal. Type in ls. Let's see where we are. Okay, let's change my directory into Data Course. Type in ls. Okay, the WorldQuant project. So let's change my directory to that project. And now what I want to do is I want to practice with Git. So let's go ahead and initialize this folder as a Git repo. So Git init. So we initialize this directory to be a Git repository because we want to use Git, right? We learned about Git last week, so let's make use of it for this project. And the first file I'm going to create, I'm going to go ahead and new, text file. I'm going to create a text file. I'm going to call this requirements.txt. Requirements, I think I spelled requirements correctly. And what we're going to have here is we're going to say Flask. And hit save. What this file contains is what is the Python package we need for our project. We want to play around with Flask, so let's go ahead and try that out. So we're going to put this, we're going to have a very simple directory, very simple file, Recarbon CKC, have Flask. Of course, we're going to expand on this, but we'll just have Flask right now. So now if I go back to the terminal, I'm going to say Python 3 -m venv venv. Python 3 -m venv venv. I'm going to hit enter. Okay. So now if I type in ls, notice there is a directory called venv. You can cd into it, and I see, okay, it looks like there's some directories in there. Lib, Python 3.7, site packages, easy install, setup tools, nothing too exciting, kind of weird. So what happened here? What is this directory? This venv directory is our virtual environment. In this directory contains the Python environment that we're going to use for our project. If I go back and let's explain what we did here, right? I told you to run this line of code, but let's explain it. Here we're saying we're going to use Python 3. We're going to run the module, that's what -m. We're going to run the module called venv. And venv is for virtual environment. And we're going to create a virtual environment that we call venv. So let's run in Python 3 the module venv, and we'll create a virtual environment called venv. And that's our isolation. We're going to install Python packages in that specific environment. So I'm going to do a command called pip freeze. Pip is the Python utility to install packages. It stands for pip installs packages. Pip freeze tells us all the packages and the versions for our current environment. So if I run pip freeze, these are all the Python packages that we use for your environment for the notebooks. There's quite a lot of them. But notice that one of them is our static grader, right? The grader you use. So this is our system-wide Python environment. We don't want to mess up this environment. So what we got to do is we got to get into our virtual environment. We create the virtual environment, but now we've got to activate it. So to activate it, we say source venv bin activate. And now we are in our virtual environment. Now we are in our virtual environment. So let's run pip freeze. Let's run pip freeze to see what we get. And I get nothing. I don't get anything. I get something different, so we get something different, so we know, hey, something is different now, right? Because I do pip freeze and I get nothing. Well, we get something different because we are in our virtual environment, and we don't get anything because we haven't installed anything into our virtual environment. All we've done is created it, activated it, and say, hey, what packages are in here? Well, there's nothing yet. Of course, we're going to install packages into our environment. We're going to install them, but right now there's nothing. And I see it. Let me take a look at the chat here. Ramsey is saying, I guess it's okay to name your virtual environment anything, right? Yes, you can name your virtual environment anything. Some people like to use venv. I always use venv. Some people like to use env for environment. Some people like to give it a name that's descriptive about the project. So we could have called it WorldQuant_project. We could call it project. It's up to you. In fact, the different name would follow this last argument here, my environment name. This is where that would go here. So yes, you can name it anything. And when you activate it, right here, you see this right here? This tells us what environment we're using. If there's nothing there, it means we're using our system environment. So here, we've activated the virtual environment that we've named venv. Of course, if we called it something else, like my venv name, then it would say my venv name. Let me know if there are any questions. So we've activated our virtual environment. So now let's install a Python package. Let me know if there are any questions. I'll take a look at the chat. But now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install a package into our virtual environment. And notice I have a file called requirements.txt. I have a file called requirements.txt. So let's use this file to install a package. And this might be a little bit weird because there's only one package, but this will be great when I have a lot of packages. So the way to do that, the way to install the packages in a file is we say pip install -r and the name of the file. The name of the file that contains those requirements. And please, please make sure you have activated your virtual environment. Because if we do pip install and we're not in a virtual environment, then we're going to start messing with our system-wide Python environment. So please, please, please make sure you have activated your virtual environment. And don't recall that the way to activate it is source, the name of the environment, in this case I call it venv, bin activate. So please make sure you've activated. And then once you have activated, we'll install that package. We'll install all the packages in this file here. Pip install -r requirements.txt. I'm going to hit enter. And bingo. Notice it told us it downloaded Flask and installed it. And we are good to go. So now let's do pip freeze. And here are all the packages that are installed in my environment at the moment. Now anything that you might say, hey, I installed Flask and there it is right there. But what's the deal with all these other packages? I didn't remember installing those. Remember, I just did install what's in requirements.txt. It's just Flask. Where are all these other packages coming from? Why did those get installed? And the reason is because very rarely is a Python package, very rarely does it not depend on anything else. For example, pandas, a Python package pandas, is built on top of NumPy. So one of the requirements of pandas is NumPy. So if I were to install pandas, what I install, not only do I install that package, but I install all the dependencies, all the sub requirements of that package, which is great because it'd be very annoying if I installed Flask, but I didn't install all the things that Flask needs to run, right? Because I install Flask, I don't want to look up online, okay, what are the requirements that Flask need, and specify them. That'd be very annoying. So it's great that when I just put in requirements.txt is one of the requirements, Flask, and then when I install it, it brings in all the ones it needs to run. And I get all these other packages. For the most part, really, who cares what these packages do? I mean, I don't want to be, we should care, but somewhat. We should care somewhat. But it'd be very annoying if I have to like track these down and put them explicitly. We'll talk about other things, other ways of dealing with these things, but we can just focus on putting on our requirements.txt what we need directly and let pip install those dependencies. So now I am good to go. I am good to go. I've got Flask in my environment. And then what I'm going to do next is I am going to open up, let's talk about Flask. Now that I got Flask installed, let's work with Flask. I'm going to go here. I'm going to open up a text file. I'm going to rename this text file app.py. And let's create our very simple application here. And for this application, what I want to happen is that every time someone visits my application, I want to greet them. I'm going to greet them saying hello. Very simple. So I'm going to import Flask what? From Flask, import the Flask class. And I'm going to define a function called main. And all this function does, it returns a string that says hello. And then I say if this is the main file, I'm going to run main. Save that. I'm not going to use Flask right now, but just a very simple function. Call it app.py. Has one function that returns hello. So if I go to the terminal and I say Python app.py, app.py, well, that just returns, well, that returns a variable, but let me just print this out, right? Print out. Forgot about the print statement. Let's go back here. Let's run that. It just says hello. Very simple. But now what I want to do is I want to take what I have here and create a very simple application in which every time someone visits the page, they get greeted with hello. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is the first thing I do is once I've imported from Flask, import this Flask class, I'm going to create a Flask object. And what it needs the name of the file. The name of the file is contained in this special variable called dunder name dunder. The next thing I do is I decorate this function. I decorate a function. I do app.route slash, and it's route. And it's a decorator, so it's at. So let's explain what went on here. What I am saying here is that when someone visits the root page of my application, it is going to run this function. It's going to run this function called main. And then I'm going to say app.run here. So when someone runs this file directly, it will run app.run. What this does is this creates the application defined by this variable, this object here. And when someone visits the main page, in other words, slash, it will return a string that says hello. Very simple application, but let's try it out. Let's try it out. So if I go into the terminal and I type in Python app.py, what it says here, it says serving Flask app environment production. A couple of warnings. Let's not worry about that right now. And it's telling us where our application is running. This is the URL of our application. Now, 127, this here refers to our local host. So it's not running on the World Wide Web. Our application is simply running on our local host, our computer, our server, your account, your specific pod. It's running on your pod. It's not running on the World Wide Web. It's running on your local host. I'm going to right click. I'm going to click on this link here, and I get site cannot be reached. And this here is just a peculiarity of our system, of our environment, because we're running a server where there are multiple accounts on this server. We have several pods we have access to. So in order for you to access your Flask application, we have to type in a little bit of additional code. Let me go ahead and fetch that out. I always forget what we have to write out for our Flask application if it's running on Jupyter Hub. If you were doing this on your personal computer, you would just simply go here. That would work out, no problem. But since we're running this on a pod and it's going through a proxy server, there is something else we have to write. And I always forget what that is. Let me see if I can try to remember. I have it somewhere written down. If I go into, let's see, user proxy 5000. There we go. There we go. instead visit this here. And by the way, where it says user, enter your username. Don't enter mine. It won't work because you don't have access to my pod. So try that out. In fact, let me just copy and paste this in the chat. And I'll pick your username. So just modify, replace. I don't think it properly linked in the chat. Looks like it got confused where the link ended. But just modify that, copy paste it, just change it to your username on the pod. A very simple message that says hello. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Nothing terribly exciting, but you can imagine we can do additional things with this. Right? Very simple application, just say hello. What if we wanted a route? In other words, a location that someone can visit that gives them a different message. Maybe when they visit, return, let's say goodbye. Let's say if they visit a certain endpoint, a certain location of our application, maybe we want to return a different message, like goodbye. Yeah, so it's our home page. Exactly. This is our home page. But now we want to add another page, another route. In this case, it's going to print out goodbye. It's going to display goodbye. So what we do is we define a function that returns the string goodbye. And then what we do next is we have to use this decorator, this app.route. Here we're telling Flask, when someone visits, I don't know, by, when someone visits by, then this function is executed instead. So let's hit save. We saved it. And then I'm going to go, let's go ahead and close that. I did control C to kill my application. Let's run it again. Let's go back here. I'm going to refresh my page. I see hello. But now if I say bye, goodbye. So if I visit the other page, not home, but by, that route by, then I get the other message, goodbye. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of things here. I'm going to say debug true, and I'm going to say development equals true. I'm going to make those additional changes. These are going to change our application to say we can allow it to debug any errors, and we are in development mode. That's all we're going to do. It's going to be a little easier to work with. Hit save, go back here, go back to the terminal, close that. Let's run it again. And it looks like I got an error. And unexpected, I think there's a typo. Development, hit save, go back here, run it again. And I get an error message. So let me see what that keyword argument is. Flask app.run. Let's see. Env true. Okay, I see. That's if default true if env is development. I set env to be development. That's what I need to do. I'll copy that. And let's go back here. and I'm going to say env equals development. Let's try that out and just make sure that works. Let's see. This is enabled when env is equal to development and is overwritten. Let's see. I think it should be called, still misspelling. Development. Let me just do this. Let me do Python. Give me a sec. Env is perhaps uppercase. Maybe that's what it is. I always do it a different way. And there's no E. Let's see. Keyword argument. Property. Let's just set debug equals true. I think that might be enough. I think setting debug equals true should be enough. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, I think that's what I wanted. Actually, if I do source, if I say export flask env equals development, there we go. I only know how to do it through this environmental variable, and I was avoiding doing that because I didn't want to talk about environmental variables just yet. It doesn't matter. I think more important thing is set debug equals true. So if I go back here, refresh, goodbye, and let's say I want to add another route. That says maybe when someone goes to export flask debug equals true. If I say maybe a function called ask. I don't know. And it returns, how are you doing? And then I want to create that route, app.route. So every time someone goes to ask, then we return that string. Go ahead and hit refresh. I didn't have to refresh that. This is what I want to refresh. And now if I say ask, I get a string that says how you're doing. It's a very simple application, right? Nothing too fancy. But now you can think about what we can do. Now that we know how to do something when a route is hit, what we could do next is we can take this code that we've written out. Or is it? I don't know. What happened to that code? Was it this one here? I think it was this one. Yeah, we can take this code and we can use it instead of what we have here. So now we can make a little more interesting web application. So let's go ahead and start doing that. We can use our weather code and use it here. Exactly, right? Exactly. So now, let's think about this, what we want. Let's think about our project breakdown. So remember separation of concerns. Let's go ahead and have one Python file called app.py. This is a Python file that's going to run the Flask application. In here, let's have another function that does the getting the data and returning it. So here we'll call this maybe greeting. I'll call this file greet, and this does the actual getting the weather data and so forth. And we can have these files communicate with each other. So what we want to do here is let's go ahead and create a new file. New text file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take these functions we have here and just copy them over. Copy them over. Get geolocation. Someone's getting a 404 error. If you are getting a 404 error, then I believe 404 is not found. Make sure that you're running the your application. Make sure you're running your application and you're accessing the application properly. Don't access mine because you're forbidden from there. You have to run it on your end and then put your username instead of mine. So try that out. I'm not sure exactly what you did, but if you did something differently than what I said here, go ahead and try that out. Yeah, maybe there's a misspelling too. I don't know. Let's see. Let's get the weather. I'll just copy this here. I'll call this rename greet.py. I can imagine if I did a misspelling, if I said AS, then not found. So make sure you have it spelled correctly, as Timur suggested. Okay. Oops. So now I pasted that. So let's look at these functions here. Get geolocation, get the weather. And then the main function we have here. And then I can say if name equals main, then I can run the main function. So what I want to do is I want to have a function. Instead of main, I wanted to do is call this greet. And what it's going to do, it should accept an IP address. It should accept an IP address. No, that's fine. It'll accept nothing. And then what it should do, it should return the string instead. Return the string. I'm going to call this, I'm going to rename this and call this greetings. Let's name it something better, right? What does it do? Let's see, what does this function do? This function here gets weather data, gets geolocation data, and returns a greeting. That's all it's doing. So maybe we call this, it's calling a lot of external APIs. So maybe we can call this fetch data. I don't like that. I don't like that name. Anyone suggest a good file name here? I don't like greet. Let me know a good file name. I'm going to call it greet right now, but I don't like that name. But let's go ahead and examine what this function does. Right, it's the same thing we had before. Get our IP address, use that to get our coordinates, get our weather, and display this string here. Any suggestions for a good file name? I'm kind of running out of ideas here. Process inputs, maybe fetch weather data, or weather data. How about that? How about I just call it weather data? New rename weather data.py. Someone is saying welcome. Yeah, maybe I could have said it that. Welcome. File. Get message. Maybe get message. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'll call that. I'll call it message.py. I'll let you choose what you want to call it, but I'm going to call it message.py. So now, if I go to the command line, let me close my application. I can say Python message. And I get a name error. Request is not defined. Request is not defined. Right? So let's import requests. Let's go here. And at the very top, I do import requests. Hit save. And I go back to the terminal. Let's run that again. And I get a module not found error. But wait a minute, I thought I had requests installed. We were playing around with requests package last week, right? And it worked out. Why am I getting a module not found error? What do you think? What is causing this problem here? I thought I had it installed. We used it, right? We used it last week. What happened? Any suggestions? Exactly. The reason why requests worked last time is because we were using our system's Python environment, which had requests installed. But now we are working in a virtual environment that we've isolated, but we only installed one package directly, Flask. It doesn't have request. And in fact, if I do pip freeze, I don't see requests. It's missing. Right? It's in a different environment. Exactly. So now we need to install requests into our environment. So there's several ways to go about doing this, but what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and go and add in a requirements.txt. Not requirements, requests. Requests. Let's put that in a requirements.txt. Exactly, right? It's not in a virtual environment. We need to install it in our virtual environment. So I'm going to put request here. Go back to the command line. And since I'm still in the virtual environment, I'm going to do pip install requirements.txt. Pip install -r. -r is the option that says what follows next is a file. Let's hit that. And now let's hit pip freeze just to convince ourselves. There is request right there. Bingo. There it is. So now if I run it, Python message, and it ran. Of course, it doesn't print anything out, or I can probably just said print. Well, I called print greeting. All right, it's 12.1 degrees Celsius right now. So it warmed up. It warmed up since this morning, right? Exactly, right? Y'all understood why it wasn't working out. So now what we can do is with this working, we can go back to this file here and we say from, since we want to make use of a function in the other file, we got to import it for us to use in this file. We could have put all the code here in this single file, but that is not separating our concerns. When someone looks at the app.py file, they don't want to see that functionality. Let's separate that away. If I'm interested in what's going on, or I can open up that file. -r stands for we are saying that we want to, if I do pip install --help to see the little menu there, the -r is to specify a file to install the requirements. So we're saying, hey, install which requirements? Those that are located in the file that follows right afterwards. So now here we can say from, I think I called it message. You might have called it something else. That's fine if you called it something else. Import greet. import greet. And then what I can do is when someone visits the endpoint weather, or maybe we'll call it greet. Call it greet. Then what we do is we return the greet function. So now let's go back here. Let's run our application. Python @py. Let's go here and let's go into greet. There it is. Now we have a very simple application that gives us the weather. And I perhaps don't need, and it gives me the weather. And if someone goes into hello, right? Someone goes hello. It wasn't called hello. It was just the main one. Hello. And then greet. So we got something that works. All right. Oops. File save. However, the problem is that while we can get the weather, what I really want to do is I want to get the weather of the person who visits my website. And that's not what I'm currently doing. I'm giving the weather of the server, where the server is located. Right? No one cares what the weather is in Virginia, right? No one really cares what the weather is where our pod is located. So now what we need to do next is we need to write the code that will take the IP address of whoever is visiting our website. And that's the next thing we're going to work on tomorrow. But let me know if there are any questions. This was a crash course on Flask, right? There's a lot more things that Flask can do. But this here is pretty much crash course. Can we add HTML instead of just Python? Yes, exactly. What we could do is we can use Flask to render an HTML template. Imagine if we get this a more complicated application, we want actually to display HTML. We could use HTML instead. So this was just scratching the surface on Flask. We're going to build a very bare bones application. But then once we build that bare bones application, then I'm going to invite everyone to suggest changes on that application. Yep, there's a function called render template. Exactly, Ramsey. And yeah, so tomorrow we will talk about a couple ends here, and then we'll talk about how we can get actually IP address of a person who visits our page. And then we'll talk about how we can deploy this application. And what you want to do is for deployment, I'm going to use a website called Heroku.com. I'm going to use Heroku. Heroku is free. So if you want to do this, you want to deploy the application for you on your account, you'll have to sign up for Heroku and do some installation. So some of the stuff we're going to do in the coming days, I'll have to do it outside of the pod. Yeah, I think we're ready to go for deployment coming up in a few days. So that's it, guys. I have to run. And with that said, take care, have a good rest of your day, and see you tomorrow.